So we're good.
I thought that was pretty
I'm good.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and call the special session Monday, June 27th to order. And first we'll need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I would like, can we discuss?
Yep.
Could we move the math curriculum or the math series above the budget vote since the math series is in the budget? Probably that's, I'm thinking that's.
Yes, yes, we can. We can move that to number 4 and move the budget to number 5.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we'll amend the agenda. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Well, first item we have under requiring action is to request permission to schedule an exec session to discuss personnel matters immediately following this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Tanner?
Yes.
Ms. Drury?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn? Yes. Ms. Stewart?
Yes.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Ms. Whiten?
Yes.
Mr. Weems? Yes. Okay.
Okay, we have the consideration of kindergarten center universal breakfast program.
I talked with Ms. Hobeck. The program was a success again this year. This is the year that we have to go to the State Department and ask if they allow us to continue that program. They do it on 3-year increments. We have to tell them every year that we want to continue to participate, but this would be an actual year where we fill out the Provision 2 documentation and ask to be approved. I have no indication from Desi why we would not be approved. We have our food service training tomorrow, so we'll get more information. Just to remind the board, kindergarten is the only place we do that. We actually serve breakfast. We push the breakfast out to the classrooms, and with that Provision 2 element, based on the free and reduced numbers in our district, we're able to supply everybody in the building, regardless of their free and reduced status. They are able to eat a free breakfast that day. So, and that, it's twofold for us. One, it encourages participation in the breakfast program, and it sets that habit early on. And from the educational side of things, we've seen a lot less visits to the nurse mid-morning because they're hungry. Takes some stress off the parents in that kindergarten year. So we feel like we lose about $8,000 in what we could collect in revenue if our paid students and our reduced students were actually paying for those meals. But we feel like every year when we evaluate it, the cost of that, the loss of that revenue is more than offset by the benefits. So it'd be the administration's recommendation to at least put the paperwork in to request that the state approve that for us for the 16-17 school year.
This be the third year?
This would be our fourth.
Fourth it is, our 4th year.
Oh, is it really?
Mhm. We've done it for 3.
Yeah.
I make that motion.
I'll second.
A motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries.
We have the consideration of FY16 budget adjustment.
This is just simply a cleanup. We've gone through the revenue sides and the expenditure sides, and there's lots of little nitpicky adjustments we could make just for the sake of moving $1 here to $1 here. But what we want to focus on today is really 3 major adjustments. We're requesting that you move $140,000 from Fund 1 salaries to Fund 2 salaries to cover actual expenditures. We're asking that you move $73,000, or not move, but increase the debt service budget by $73,000. And this is more a technicality. I just want to make sure we have in our notes in our board minutes where we increase that amount. You all have already approved that. That was to reflect the final amount for that early payoff that we did in May. But there's a state statute that says you cannot overspend in a fund. So I just want to make sure we have a budget adjustment in our notes showing that we added that $73,000 to a budgeted line item in the budget to cover that. And then the last one is to move $8,600 from Fund 4, where we budgeted for equipment, actually to Fund 1 for repairs.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the budget adjustments? Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next, we have the consideration of FY17 math textbooks. Mr. Mays will present that information.
I will, and if the board is okay, I'm going to stay seated while I'm doing this, just so I can juggle my things here, if you don't mind. Mr. Williams and I talked about maybe just going over the process that we used to select the books and then what we did during that process. So I'm going to pull Lori. I've written down what I'm going to say. I'm going to read through that today, so hopefully it won't be too dry. But I don't want to miss anything as I go
Did
through.
he just say that I was dry? He's just.
No, I didn't say I was
I think that's what
right.
he just said.
Well,
Sometimes when you're covering something, you'll write it.
I'm a little dry, that's what we're.
See, I put up with every day. Okay. But during the 14-15 school year, the academic principals and coaches and I discussed the instructional material needs that we were going to be having for the upcoming future, specifically what we could look at in 15-16. And at that point, we preliminarily, it's a hard word to say, identified math as a need for new instructional materials. And then in the 15-16 year, this year, early in the year, we discussed that at our first two meetings. Do we still think math's our biggest need? Is that where we want to go? We all felt like that was the place to go. They talked to their teachers in the building, and they all felt like that we need to look at the possibility of looking at new math materials to choose for 15-16 to be used in 16-17. And so as part of that process, we began to request sample instructional materials from vendors. We did put a November 20th deadline to receive those sample materials for review. We learned with the social studies adoption last year that if we didn't give a deadline for those materials, we would keep getting new materials in, and then we could never review the materials. If we're trying to get new materials out, we couldn't make a decision, so we put a deadline on that of November 20th. Materials were distributed for review in January, with most of this review occurring at the January 4th and 5th in-service days. Not every building did that, but most buildings chose to use one of those two in-service days to review the math textbooks. On February 17th, teachers submitted review sheets of the materials, and then we looked at the point values and their summary sheets, and those were totaled in order to narrow the selection of the top two choices. We've done that with social studies and again this year. And so in the Case through 6 math series, the different series received the following average total points. Eureka Math had a total of 82 average points. Go Math had 45. Math in Focus had 40. Envisions 35. Math Expressions 34. My Math 31, and Everyday Math 13. And so based on that, Eureka and Go Math were the two series that were selected for further review. In 7th and 8th grade, these math series received the following average total points. Glencoe received 97 points, that's an average score. Envisions had an average score of 94. Go Math 81. Digits 74. Big Ideas 58. Eureka 50. Carnegie 47, Everyday Math 34, and Agile 16. And based on those average percentages, Glencoe and Envisions were chosen for further review. We also looked at the junior high honors courses, Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 together, because those courses flow together, especially with the honors track. In that area, Pearson received an average score of 73, Big Ideas 64, Glencoe 53, Discovering 41, Eureka 37, Carnegie 17, and Agile 11. And so based on that, Pearson and Big Ideas was chosen for further review. And in Geometry, Pearson received an average score of 94, Big Ideas 83, Discovering 47, Eureka 42, Glencoe 28, and Agile 21. And the same as Algebra, Pearson and Big Ideas were chosen for further review. At that point, then, we invited the companies from these different series to come in and make presentations for the teachers. Teachers were invited to attend, and we had a good turnout with those presentations. On March 9th, Eureka Math presented to K through 6th. On March 16th, Go Math presented to K through 6th. On March 24th, Glencoe presented to 7th and 8th grade. On March 23rd, Big Ideas, which is a Houghton Mifflin company, presented to high school and the 7th and 8th grade honors. On March 30th, Pearson presented to high school, and on March 30th, Envisions presented to 7th and 8th. Envisions is also a Pearson company, which is why they chose to go back to back. Once both vendors gave presentations to the different levels, the teachers were asked to vote for their choice for math instructional materials. And this vote occurred at different times at different levels, depending on when they finished the presentations. High school and junior high voted prior to the other building levels. And Big Ideas was selected as the algebra honors, algebra and then the junior high honors program instructional materials. one of the junior high honor, or the junior high honors teacher asked if for consistency, junior high could be allowed to have a presentation for big ideas. And I said we could if the junior high teachers were willing to do so. They were, and so Big Ideas came and gave a presentation on April 25th in the 7th and 8th grade. Following the presentations, the following votes for series were submitted. So this is where they actually chose what they preferred to go with. And I'm going to start at junior high just because the elementary is such a big tally. At junior high, there were 3. This is the series for all of junior high except the honors program. Glencoe received 3 votes and Big Ideas 2, so Glencoe was the chosen company for junior high. For algebra and the junior high honors program, Big Ideas received 4 votes and Pearson received 3, so Big Ideas was the selected series. For geometry, Big Ideas received 3 votes and Pearson received none. Because of the small number of instructors in Algebra 3, trigonometry, statistics, and discrete math and calculus, those teachers chose the instructional materials and just reported their choice to me. Excuse me. Algebra 3 and trigonometry chose Cengage Learning. Statistics and Statistics and discrete math chose Peernot, which is a Pearson company. Calculus elected not to receive a book, but did ask if we would purchase Learnerator, which is from the company Albert.io, and it's an online application for hands-on practice and feedback. And so that was included also in what we're looking at. For the elementary series, I'm going to look at this 2 different ways because I think it's interesting to see the vote. In elementary, at kindergarten, Eureka received 15 votes, Go Math received 2. At Southeast Elementary, Eureka received 13 votes, and Go Math 1. At Matthews Elementary, Eureka received 17 votes, Go Math received 3. At Lee Hunter, Eureka received 10 votes, and Go Math 8. And at the 5th and 6th grade center, Eureka received 5 votes, and Go Math 4. I actually look at it when I'm looking at the choices that the buildings make. I look at it by grade level to see if each grade level is in agreement and just what the best choice is. So if you look at those votes by grade level, we've already said kindergarten, the vote was 15, Eureka, Go Math 2. 1st grade overall was Eureka 5 votes, Go Math 5 votes. In 2nd grade, Eureka had 12 votes and Go Math 0 votes. 3rd grade, Eureka had 7 votes and Go Math 3 votes. In 4th grade, Eureka had 7 votes and Go Math 3 votes. In 5th grade, Eureka had 1 vote and Go Math had 3 votes. In 6th grade, Eureka had 4 votes and Go Math 1. Then special education and title teachers voted. Eureka had 7 votes and Go Math had 1. We also had a couple of sheets where the grade wasn't specified or wasn't clear. I will tell you both of those votes were Lee Hunter, and both of those were Eureka. Eureka had 2 votes and Go Math had 0. So the total vote for elementary was Eureka received 60 votes, or 77% of the vote, and Go Math received 18, which was 23% of the vote. The instructional materials were then presented to the Instructional Materials Committee on May 24th. Several questions were asked by the committee, but no objections to the materials chosen were presented. So based on the results of this process, I would like to recommend the approval of the purchase of the following math textbook publishers for the designated grade levels. At kindergarten through 6th grade, the recommendation of administration is Eureka Math. Also at kindergarten through 6th grade, we'd like to recommend the approval of the purchase of Zern. It's an online component to Eureka Math. I will say that we've offered this, should the board approve the purchase, to teachers on a volunteer basis. If they'd like to use Zern to go along with the instruction, they may, and we'll try to support them with it if they do. At kindergarten to 6th grade, we're also asking to purchase homework helpers. As you know, that's something the CSIP committee has come up many times, that the parents would like to have more information about math, and this goes along with Eureka Math and give parents some information. At 7th and 8th grade, excluding honors, administration recommends the purchase of Glencoe Math, which is a McGraw-Hill product. 7th and 8th grade honors, high school algebra 1 and algebra 2, we're recommending Big Ideas Math, which is a Houghton Mifflin company. Algebra 3, and trigonometry, Cengage Learning. Statistics and discrete math, we're recommending Peernot, which is a Pearson company. And at calculus, we're recommending the purchase of the Learnerator program by Albert.io. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious, when we look back at the 2015 scores, the assessments, I noticed that with, like, Lee Hunter has, I think we're 48% proficient or better.
I don't know, it could be.
And, well, I recently looked at it, and this is why I'm curious about it, because I'm a little concerned. And in 15, and Lee Hunter's kind of wasn't really jamming down with the Eureka and Engage New York. That school was not. And, of course, it's a very diverse population there, too. And Southeast and Matthews they were in the 30s with proficient, and they were using those Eureka Engage New York series. And so that concerns me that the elementary school doing the best on the same assessment as the other two schools took has so much better grades with not using those. Can you explain that?
I can try to. Lee Hunter has traditionally had the highest scores in math. I'll remind you too that last year the test was different. It was a different test, so scores across the board pretty much dropped. But when you look at our comparison to the state average, we narrow that gap between our scores and the state scores. So, it's hard to say. Lee Hunter 3rd and 4th grade probably would be probably the least. I'm trying to word this. They probably did the least amount of incorporation of Eureka, though they still did quite a bit. Lee Hunter 1st and 2nd had quite a bit of using that materials. But the best I can say is just that Lee Hunter has been pretty much the top school in elementary for some time with math scores. And so I don't think it was that much different last year. And like I said, I do feel like we did narrow the gap somewhat with the compared to the state scores. I'm sorry.
Do you have any concerns in a different direction about the going from using the Eureka math, which is, I think, Engage New York with another name, going from that through your elementary school and then, or through 6th grade, and then 7th and 8th grade teachers did not want Eureka. They had used it last year, is my understanding, and they did not like it.
Couple things. Eureka is basically the Engage New York program. Great Minds is the name of the company, and they took the Engage New York and basically made an actual textbook from it that can be purchased. Somewhat. I mean, I do a little bit, and I talked to my math coaches about this, and I said, well, we have an issue because we kind of saw, based on the early results, that the first set of vote that junior high was probably not going to go for Eureka. And I talked to Ms. Sheeter and Ms. Hunter about that. And their comment was, if we can incorporate it and use Eureka with fidelity with elementary level, then the students should have the skills they need to be able to do well with whatever series we purchase at the junior high. I am comfortable with the junior high series. Honestly, I might have preferred if they had chosen Engage just for the continuity across all those grade levels. But a little bit of concern, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. I think if we can do this with fidelity, that they'll be able to flow smoothly with junior high.
Did you talk to the teachers at that grade level and find out why they just did not like that?
No, I really didn't. Ms. Hunter talked to them some. I think that they were okay with the program, but when they, with Eureka, from what I understand, but when they looked at the other series, they just felt like it meet their needs better, that they thought would do a better job with the students. And we heard a similar thing in high school. High school was a little afraid. They thought that the expectations for Eureka might be a little high for them, and they didn't want to go there. They thought that they could better meet the students' needs with a different series as well. Will I answer your questions?
I mean, as well as we can at this point. I mean, I really wish we could see more statistically before we decide what math series we're going to use, because I do have some concerns about our math scoring and whether we can look at that series and say that's going to help us or not, because that's quite a large expenditure to buy that series and not be really, I don't know, I just don't know that we've looked at the statistics enough to make that plunge.
Well, I know anytime you do a textbook purchase, you're going to spend quite a bit of money. The teachers filled out a review sheet where they went through the series and they looked at how it addressed math practices. They looked at the rigor of the textbook. They looked at just all the different ways they thought that would work for their students. They did with all the textbooks and made comments and such on there. And so I do feel like that they looked at it. Did they look at necessarily how the series has been used on the districts and the results they've had. I don't think that they did, and based on the comments, I didn't see that, but I'll also say that there's not a lot of results from that yet. It's still a relatively new series. But, you know, I did have several comments about the fact that they thought that the support the program gave is being beneficial to the students now, would be helpful to them in the future.
Well, and I know, and, you know, hindsight's 20/20 also, but one of my concerns is also the way that, you know, the teachers, and I know that some were uncomfortable voting their desired vote on the textbooks because they didn't want to be considered not following down the path that they felt that it was desired by maybe administration or coaches or something. And so I know that there were some teachers who didn't vote the way they wanted to and voted for Eureka. And maybe if we had a vote where you didn't have to put down your grade and your school and you could kind of really be anonymous with it, is there any way we can go back and do that?
Probably
instead
so.
of doing this?
I will say I talked to the principals. The principals had an envelope. They would not take the votes from the teachers. They had the teachers put in the envelope so they wouldn't see. The purpose of putting the school and the grade on there is so that I can see which grades are in favor, which grades aren't, and look at, you know, if we had, for example, 4th, 5th, and 6th that were not in favor of Eureka, we might have looked at go bad for them if that was the case.
So are you the only one that sees that then?
Actually, no. We had, I had a couple of teachers and the principals got together and myself and counted the ballots. But again, on there it does have the grade level and it has the school, but there's no other identifying information on what teacher is what.
Chuck, at that meeting, you know, on the 24th, the committee meeting, I took notes of when the 4 teachers spoke about each math series.
Materials, yes.
And I was looking back over these when I left, and on the 4 teachers that talked about the Eureka math, it kind of stood out to me that most of them said the things that they liked about the series were things that benefited them as teachers. For instance, they liked how the lessons were laid out. It was broke down into different parts. The teacher's guide was easy to follow. The best thing about Eureka is it comes with everything you need. More freedom to walk around. Things like that. And so I wanted to find out, I knew that Eureka is what this is Engage New York renamed now. And I had talked to some teachers that had talked to the Eureka reps that came in and gave the presentations. And one thing that struck me was they said that they made the comment that the reason why they changed names was because there was such controversy with the Engage New York that they wanted to take that name off, and they cleaned up the mistakes and stuff in New York Engage and renamed it Eureka. So I looked at New York State, which is the state that actually started using this from the very beginning, and I wanted to know where it came from. So when I was looking, I found that this curriculum was developed by an organization in Washington, D.C. known as Common Core, Inc. It was developed by a corporation, and they were given $14 million to develop this corporation for the Department of Education of New York. They used their race to the top dollars to do so, and then it talks about all the different places that I went, and I went to the New York State Education website as well, that Bill Gates, who is behind Common Core, gave in excess of $10 million to fund this curriculum, this math curriculum. And right there to me, and I think to a lot of people who have objections to Common Core curriculum, okay, I'm not talking about the standards because we have to use whatever standards that we have to use. Number one is that this was developed by corporations. It was not developed by teachers. It was funded by someone that wanted to put a curriculum with the standards. And I went on to New York education website, and I got the statistics because they did start using this as a statewide curriculum for their math. And I looked up their scores because I wanted to see how, what kind of success they had with it, because they've used it for, or they did use it for a couple of years. And if I can find it. Their proficient, advanced proficient rate was 36% statewide using this material. And if you look back at our percentages when we used on the last math test, we were using it for about a year there, our results were about the same, except some of our scores, if I can find my stuff here, were a little bit less than that. So what my point is that my concern is, number one, of where it was developed from. That's a huge concern. Number two, if you look at the New York that used this with fidelity, and that was another word that kept coming up with when I looked this up. Their scores were not well at all. Our scores using this, basically by most of our elementary, we had 42.9% in third grade, 35.4% in fourth grade, 28.9% in fifth grade, 31.6% in sixth grade, 23.4% in seventh grade, 15.7% in eighth grade. Now, it bothers me to spend this kind of money and to adopt this series district-wide when you look at places that have used this for years and they are not having success. A lot of schools, I know Louisiana went to this, Eureka or Engage New York, they have since dropped this in a lot of school districts because they were not seeing good results with it. We are not seeing good results if you look at our scores from last year and even the year before, when not everybody was using it, but I think some teachers were kind of using it a little bit, you know. And it bothers me, that's one thing that bothers me the most. And I think that we have to look at something that Rebecca talked about was when you look at the individual schools, when you look at Southeast and Matthews and Lee Hunter, Southeast and Matthews are focus schools. So Matthews just became a focus school this year, and they were using this math curriculum. Lee Hunter, on the other hand, is not a focus school, and their scores, there were a number of teachers there that did not use this math curriculum, and their scores were way above what the other two schools were. So it makes me question whether or not this is the best thing for our school district. Also, something that I know personally, something that I think that we've heard from a lot of parents in the community, and when I was looking up how this worked in like New York and Louisiana, different states, a lot of the complaint from parents were that they could not help their kids with the math homework, that it took them out of the equation of helping their kids and being involved with their kids with using this curriculum. And I think that one of the most important things when you want success from students and for your school is to have parents that are involved. And I know that everyone in this school district tries their hardest to get parents involved in many different ways. And I don't like approving something that has been shown here and other places that it does exact opposite of what we want to see happen. I know that with my own kids, numerous times I have not been able to help them. Numerous times we've had to put the homework away and contact the teacher or send a note to the teacher. And I've heard that from lots and lots of parents, you know, while we have been using this curriculum. And that bothers me because I think that you want your parents to be able, you want them to be involved. That makes a child successful. You can see the kids that don't have that at home, and they're not as successful as the ones that do have that. So I think by looking at, if you look at the scores, if you look at what we see with people, with school districts, states that have used this, it's not successful. They are abandoning this. We've used the free version, so we haven't been out any money. But if we purchase this, we're going to be invested in this. It's not going to be something that in a year or two we're going to want to say this isn't working. We've spent $200,000+ on this curriculum. Let's do something different, because it's not that easy to just throw that kind of money away and say, well, we tried. I personally would like to see us, rethink this before we do anything, because I think that this would be a very bad decision for our school district to approve this and spend this money when there's evidence that it is not the best for us and in other places as well.
I would like to
Can I
make.
ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, my concern, maybe you can address this, is, it's hard for us to just use the MAP scores to determine success, because I think everybody agrees that test is not great, and we all wish we didn't have to have that test. And it changed last year. So even though we narrowed the gap in math based on state scores, and we don't have the new ones back, we don't have them back till August, is there any other information like benchmark scores or things like that that show a comparison over the last few years?
Yes.
Our own internal data?
Really, just in the last year, this year compared to last year, I want to put a qualifier out there because there still has been changes to the benchmark, so you're not always still comparing apples to oranges. But I try to look at the benchmarks quarter by quarter and look at how we did, this quarter compared to the same quarter last year across the different grade levels. And when I looked at that, I did see, not overall, but I did see more improvement than I did decreases using the program we did last year, Eureka Math. So overall, the benchmark results were up based on that information.
I had heard comments from several teachers, and it's not a statistical, it's not probably a valuable comment to say this, but I just heard from several people that they felt like the kids performed better on the test this year in math, from just what they could observe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I heard the same thing, but you just don't
there's
know
no way
until you
no
get the
take it to
results
scores.
back.
Yeah.
And I said it may actually be a little later than August because they're doing some setting of the different achievement levels, and maybe September we get those results back.
And would there also be, like I know Mrs. Norton, who Caroline had last year, kind of did her own combination of things. Is there still going to be some of that freedom with this new textbook
There will be
series?
not as much because if we're doing Eureka, before we didn't have an official math series, as long as teachers taught the standards, we were fine. But we've got to have some consistency across grade levels, and so a teacher like Mrs. Norton will still have some freedom to do, to tweak the lessons, but we need her to do we need her to make sure she does the core part of the program, so when the students go to 5th grade, they'll still be able to continue.
Do you remember her coming and talking to the board about math and how the Common Core and the Engage New York and all that was good, and don't be afraid, and she embraced it and she did it, and then her scores weren't, I think, what she wanted them to be with her kids. And then I think she switched to do this combination thing that has worked for her. When do textbooks have to be purchased time-wise? Is that like
Well, it would have
yesterday?
been nice to, actually in the middle of June would be nice, but we usually order them as soon as the board approves the budget. We usually order those July 1st. Even then, we're nervous about getting the mail in time.
Well, I would prefer to table this vote, and I guess I'm going to make a motion to do that, so we can maybe dig deeper on evaluating this textbook series, and maybe even do an actually, truly, totally anonymous vote might help. And I know the teachers, I'm concerned about that too. I am concerned about the truthfulness of the vote. Not that it was intended to have that result, but I'm concerned that those numbers might not be where we really are. We might have a little more, a fewer number wanting that series. And I just don't know.
What's the alternative? I mean, if we don't order them, what do you do?
If you don't order Eureka, we will not order Math Series this year because I won't have time to go back and reevaluate.
So would that mean you would just use the same?
We have to use whatever we're using now, correct?
Which we already have. I mean, if teachers like this and they feel like they like it, we have this already, basically.
A lot of the concerns from teachers or thoughts from teachers is that they're having to do a lot of running off and printing materials. And part of getting the textbooks is they have those materials there. And you mentioned at the instructional materials committee meeting, parents would have access to see that material as well. And so I do think there's an advantage to purchasing the material. As far as teachers being nervous about voting, I don't know how else to do that really. I mean, we're already doing an anonymous vote. The principals aren't taking the votes. They're putting them in the envelope. They're counted at a different time. To not have the grade level on in the school would keep us from being able to look at the statistics as far as how the vote went. And I guess we could do an anonymous vote, but again, I like to look at it by grade level to determine what the best choice is. But I didn't hear anyone complain about being nervous about knowing how they voted, and usually elementary teachers are pretty outspoken about their thoughts and feelings. So I don't know. I mean, I've got 77% of the teachers, after evaluating the series, after looking at all the series, they chose this over Go Math. So I don't agree with you, unfortunately, and still go with my recommendation that I had before.
Why would teachers, I guess I don't understand why they would be nervous. Why, do you have any idea?
I don't.
You know, talking about putting emphasis on the math.
Funny that I said? I thought I must have said something funny.
Talking about putting emphasis on the MAP scores, I don't like putting emphasis on the MAP scores either. However, the reality is that that is what's used to determine whether or not a school becomes a focus school, whether or not we get accreditation. So you have to look at that when you're determining something like this. I mean, you have to be, that's just being responsible, because you have to pay attention to those things. Because even though your benchmarks may say one thing, but when you're talking about accreditation and you're talking about if your school comes to focus school, the state is not looking at our benchmarks.
Correct.
That's for just district only. They are looking at these results right here.
Correct.
And I think that you also have to look at states that have used this years and years and years before us.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we don't have states that use this for years and years and
New
years.
York did. They used
How many years?
at least 3.
Okay, well that maybe 3. I'm thinking maybe 2 is what I'm thinking it is. But even then, that's not years and years and years. That's a few years. And in the middle of their use of that, they changed tests as well. So you're comparing apples to oranges as far as the test. So when you say that it's failed based on where it's been used, I don't agree with you with that. I don't know that we have the data to show that.
I think we have data to show that it's not really working to me here, because when you have 15.7% and 28 and 31 and 23, to me that is not success.
Your 15% at 8th grade is without your honor students being added in. Those are excluded from that because those are part of the Algebra 1. So that to say that 15% of our students are proficient is not true in 8th grade.
Okay.
It's a much higher number than
Well, let's
that.
look at 23 and 7
You're
and
correct.
31.
They
I'm
were low,
just-
but they were low across here because we changed tests, and that level changed, that achievement level. So many districts had lower scores last year. But I'll remind you too that for the first time in years, we narrowed the gap between our average and the state average, because the state average also dropped as well. And so, again, I know that we're not going to agree on
The
this.
state
but I don't-
average, they dropped that because the average all over the state was so low that they dropped that down. If they did not do that,
No.
no, they did. I talked to the guy at DESE, TJ Spalti, and he said that they dropped that average down. They had to, or there would have been more schools that would become focus schools.
If they dropped it down, would that cause more schools to become focus schools?
They dropped it down so that the schools' averages would be more in line with the state, so that that gap would be narrowed, is the way
I
he
don't
explained
know
it
how
to
you do that,
me.
because you have the average for the state and you have district scores. I mean, you're not going to adjust the district scores and leave the state average the same, because once the district scores change, it's going to skew the state average as well. I think what you're saying is maybe that the achievement levels were adjusted, and if I remember correctly, they were in ELA but not in math. But bottom line is
That's
that
not the way I
that we
understood
did,
it from him,
maybe
but
so. But the bottom line is that we did see some improvement in our scores, and our scores have been low for some time. You mentioned focus school, for example, but Matthews had higher math scores than the year before, yet they still became a focus school. It has to do with that 3-year average. And that's part of the reason we're looking at Eureka, or whatever series we're looking at, is because we have had poor performance in math. And hopefully, we're beginning to turn that corner. But, we looked at what the teachers wanted to use, and I'll tell you, it's not good to not have a specific set of materials that we use and have teachers just doing different things because you don't have that consistency across grade levels. And so when we looked at that, again, I can tell you that the teachers did vote this way. I don't share your concern that maybe they weren't able to vote. I mean, at some point, every adult has to sit up and vote or do whatever, and I just can't believe that we had that number of teachers that were scared to vote that would have skewed the results that
What
much.
was the final percentage, 77?
77% for Eureka and 23% for
K through
Go
6,
Ahead. K through
77,
6, yes.
77% of the teachers
77%
chose that series.
Yes.
So there were how many total votes?
There were 78 total votes.
And so then, what's 78?
60 votes for Eureka and 18 for Go Math.
Conceivably, we could start that Eureka Math series later in the year, right? I mean, if we ordered them later, if that was, I mean, if we tabled this and we're able to get a little more in-depth information on the series itself and maybe look at other places who have used it and how they've been doing like in more in depth.
It would be very difficult to not order this. It would very much upset your teachers because I know we did social studies, for example. They were very much wanting those materials as soon as they could to begin going through them. And again, I don't know, there's not a lot of, there are some districts that are using it, but getting an overall result is going to be difficult because it is still relatively new. I guess my point is that our teachers thoroughly looked through, we looked through 7, 8 different series. They looked at what they thought would best meet their needs, and this is what they chose to do. To me,
yeah, Chuck, but
this is what we need to
if you
do.
looked at, like I said about the 4 teachers that presented, I didn't hear anything from any teacher that said, this math program is so beneficial to my students. This is what they're doing. What I heard was what they liked. And I understand that. I'm talking about the comments that they made. I made notes. They liked the way it was laid out, lessons and things like that. But I also think that we have to pay attention to, like I said before, our parents. This math series is one that our parents do not like. We have a lot of kids that are having to be tutored. A lot of children who have been high-achieving students who are now having to be tutored and helped because of this math series. When you have parents that are unhappy and that cannot help their kids at home, there is no reason why we have to do this math series. There are so many other ones that we could go to try to find some kind of balance between what our teachers want and what our parents want. And I think that we have to think about that when we're deciding something like this. I understand that the majority of the teachers, you say, voted for this. But you have to look at the overall picture of when these kids go home with this stuff at night, what kind of help and encouragement are they going to be getting at home? You have a majority of your parents that have absolutely not. I have had complaint about this math for a year or two. And, I myself took the teaching middle school math in college 3 years ago. I was familiar with some of this stuff. That's the only reason why I even had a chance of helping my kids. Most of it I couldn't even help them with. So you take someone who's been out of school for so long or that doesn't have a lot of education in the math field, and you bring their kids home with this stuff, and all they're going to get is what they're getting from their teacher at school. And when you send homework home and you want them, the parents to work with them and they can't, we're not doing what we should be doing for our students. So I think that you can't just say, well, this is what our teachers want. I understand that, but I think you have to also look at what do our parents want as well. And this is something that our parents in this community do not want. So, if it was,
I disagree with that. I mean, I've had so many parents come and tell me, and I'm a parent, that they're excited about the stuff their kids are doing. They're amazed at the stuff their kids are doing. I mean, one thing I think, and you'll have to help me with the number, but I remember, we had how many kids qualify for state in the elementary school? Like 30 kids, the most we've ever had. And having been at those math competitions before, you're competing against public-private schools all in Southeast Missouri. And to get 30 kids to state is a huge accomplishment. I'm not saying there's not issues there. I'm hoping this thing that you talked about, the homework helper, maybe will help. I know a couple of times when I wasn't sure on terminology, I did email the teachers to find out what the terminology meant. And everyone has always been very receptive to answer those types of questions. Do you know, was that a chronic complaint to the the academic?
No, there were, because we talked about that some in our academic principal meetings, and there were some concerns from parents, but usually, like Heather said, it wasn't so much that, we didn't hear that they didn't like the program, but that they had difficulty helping the students at home, their children at home some. And so that was the thought, if we had something that could go home and give the parents more information, that would be helpful.
I don't think you can use the number of kids that go to state in those math competitions. You're talking about children who are gifted in math, and you're talking about those kids.
I don't know.
That's not everyday
I think
kids.
you're talking about sharp students, but I don't know if
Yes.
I'd call them gifted. Let me address a couple of things you said. You talked about the teachers saying what they like about the math series. When you're a teacher, when you look at what you like about the math series, you like it because that's what helps you be able to do a better job teaching the students. And that's what they're looking for. I had some comments as well on the sheets that here's one that this series is the best developed by the needs of all students in the areas of development of fluency, concept development, and assessment. The students enjoyed the fluency practice. It's very teacher friendly. Reinforces the use of mathematical manipulatives. So there are reasons why the teachers felt like this was a good series. As far as lots of parents being an objection to this, there's no way to say. There are some parents who had issues with this. There are some parents who really like this, but there's no way really to know how many you have in each camp. But the bottom line is we have to look at what we think is best for our students, what's going to help our students, and sometimes that means that you're going to be progressing those students hopefully farther in math knowledge than maybe even some of our parents have. And so that's where the homework helper will be an assistance. That's where, like Amy said, talking to the teacher and saying I'm having trouble, what can you do to help me with that? But again, ultimately it's your decision what we choose. I'm making the recommendation based on the work that we did. It was a year-long process that we did in evaluating these series and looking at what we thought would best meet the needs. But it's your decision whether you allocate those funds or not. I stand by my recommendation. I think it's the right thing to do.
Is there a difference in the methodology of teaching the Go Math and Eureka?
I don't know if I'd say difference in methodology. A lot of the math series are moving to more use of creativity by the students, being able to demonstrate the comprehension, not just rote understanding of the skills, but being able to apply those skills in different ways. And you had some teachers who thought that the Go Math was the better series in doing that. It was a smaller number, but you had some that did. But by and large, most of the teachers thought that the Eureka Math did the better job of doing that. I don't know if I'd say a difference in focus, but maybe they just felt Eureka did a better job of it.
Does it not bother you that the way this was? Does it not bother you that this math series was developed for money? And it was developed to make money for publishing companies of a new idea. It's not proven, and to make money off of the concept of we've got these new standards. We're going to roll out this curriculum that goes with it, and the reason I say that is because I talked to a teacher that has been teaching for 30 years, and I asked her what she thought about this. And she said, I tried it, I did exactly the way that they wanted me to. I did it with fidelity, I did, and she said, and I saw that my kids were struggling. And she said, and what I did was, I completely went away from that, and I went back, and she said, I got out a textbook from 1990 something that we used to teach with, just a old textbook that she kept. And she said, and I started using that, and my kids' scores went up. And she said they started grasping the concepts, and she was talking about using it with fractions and everything. And she said, she made a very point to me. She said, math is math. Math has not changed. You still, when you divide a number by another number, you get a certain number. None of that has changed. The only thing that's changed is that you have people who are trying to benefit off of this new concept of universal standards. And by saying that this math series is, the newest and best, and it's going to promote deeper thinking and more understanding, and we're not really worried about the outcome, we're worried about the process used to get to that. So I take her what she said to me, that this is someone that's been through 30 years, and she said these things have changed all over, all throughout the 30 years. But every time this happens, I go back to the basic, what we know, and that's what works the best.
The Eureka is a little different concept in how they went at this totally different as far as looking at that, building on the understanding, and being able to demonstrate what the students can do. What I said to Scott is still true. You have other series trying to do that, but Eureka is definitely not in front of everyone else. When you ask if it bothers me that a group's doing this for money, I mean, great minds took this to sell because they're wanting to make money, but the same thing's true of Go Math, of McGraw-Hill. Every publisher is looking to make money, but you're hoping to do that by developing a good product that's beneficial to the students. And so, does it bother me? No, because I think everyone's trying. I mean, anyone that's going to develop a set of math instructional materials wants to do so that they can have a product that's going to be beneficial to students, and so then they can sell that product and make money from it. But every textbook company is seeking to make money from their product. So, no, if anything, no, I don't know.
Well, I'm certainly concerned about math scores and where our district heads with math. What I struggle with here is it seems to be fairly overwhelming support amongst teachers. Now, I know, Rebecca, you're saying that for some reason teachers didn't feel like they could vote. I mean, like 77%? I mean, it's a pretty big number. It's not like it was a tie game. Yeah. I mean, you all have kids in the district too, Matt and Scott and Deke. And you all have thoughts?
It's fine in my house. I mean, you can probably all talk to Jill a little bit more honestly about it, but she has no complaints whatsoever about it.
Actually, his grades have gone up, and actually he's getting A's and high A's in math. He's never, believe it or not, he gets his homework done at school. He doesn't even have it.
And Jim, my kids make straight A's. All three of my children have straight A's in math. And I'm not so concerned about my kids. I'm going to help my kids at home. I'm going to do whatever I have to do if my kids are struggling, and they have struggled. Different ones have struggled with different things. But I'm going to do what I have to do at home. What I'm worried about is, if you look at the percentages, I'm worried about those other kids
Sure, absolutely.
that aren't going to get that, and that don't have the parents there that, if they are struggling at school, and they're just not, because there's a cutoff of what kids get the extra help and whatever. Those kids that aren't going to get that at home, I'm really concerned about them, because, or the ones that have the parents that want to help but can't. And even though, I respect Chuck and your recommendation, and I respect the vote of the teachers, but as a board, I think that we have to look more into, you have to look at the MAP scores, and you have to look at different things before you make this decision, because I think it's kind of irresponsible to approve this off of just a vote of the teachers, when there are so many other factors that are playing around, that come into this. And I also think it's irresponsible to not look at other places that have used this that have not had success. And I think that you have to look at our scores, and instead of approving it tonight, I would recommend that we table it. And I think that we should wait until we let our scores come in from this past year. Maybe let next year come through and let's test it again and see how it looks then. If there is substantial improvement, then I think maybe we can have the discussion again. But I don't think we have enough information to prove yet that this is going to be successful. I think by looking at the MAP scores and different things like that, I don't think that we have, it's conclusive enough to say this is really going to work for us. I think it's a gamble, and I don't think it's responsible or right to spend this kind of money when, if teachers feel like that they want to use this and we have it, and I know that they have to run off, and I know that's a burden to teachers, and I understand that, but they do have access to this. That's not going to change. But purchasing it and making every teacher use it and spending that kind of money, I don't think that's the right thing to do right now. So I make a recommendation that we table this vote and let.
I've got a motion on the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We've got a
Yeah,
motion.
to do that.
Second.
Okay, well, I second that then.
Okay.
So I don't know that,
So we've got a motion and a second. Further discussion?
I just want to, I don't know that it's irresponsible for the teachers to take a year-long process to look at the curriculum and decide overwhelmingly that they want to choose, or the certain elementary teachers choose a certain curriculum over a year-long process and call it irresponsible.
I didn't say that was irresponsible. I did not say that the teachers taking a year to vote is irresponsible. What I said was irresponsible was that we make a vote tonight to approve this based off of the scores that we have and not knowing what our scores are for this year that we just took the test, and seeing that we are seeing that much improvement to justify spending over $200,000 to purchase something that we already have. Because we do have this and we have been using it. The only thing that would be different is that we're getting the books. So all I'm saying is nothing's going to change. We're still, if teachers want to use this, if the 77% of the teachers want to use it, let them use it. But to purchase it and spend this kind of money when we don't have good evidence that this is working and is going to help us, I don't think that's responsible.
And that was one of my points, is that I want to be able to better evaluate that this is the appropriate materials for the children, not for the teachers necessarily. I'm glad that if they like it and it's easier for them to use and it's streamlined for them, that's great, but we've got to get that success from the scores of our students, and I think that we need to further evaluate whether that be other places that have used it for more than a year, and then just the things that I see in our very district that I pointed out at the beginning that concerns me about the skewing. And so that's what I wanted to do too, was just I want to table it and then further evaluate whether this is the best series to use.
I do want to just correct one thing. The total math purchase of all the different series is over $200,000. For Eureka itself is well under $200,000, so it's not that much. It's not a big deal, but I just want to make that point. To me, I still say the teachers that have evaluated all the different programs, they may look at what's easy for them or best for them as far as the teaching, but I think they're always looking at the best interest of the students. I just don't believe that teachers look at this without considering how all these programs are going to work with their students. So I do think that we've done due diligence in looking at the programs, looking at what we think would work best. But again, ultimately, it's your vote. So
And I'm not questioning the teachers looking at the best interests of the students. I mean, I'm not questioning that.
And I'm not being disrespectful, because I don't think it's been said that the teachers are looking at what's best for them as far as how they taught. And of course, they look at what's going to be the easiest and best way for them to reach the students, but I just think that they're always looking for the best interest of the students and what's going to work best for them when they're looking at their program.
Yeah, can I finish my comments?
Sure.
Can I speak? Is it okay if I finish my thoughts?
I didn't know that I was interrupting you.
Well, I'm head of the region, then I was going to finish. So I'm just checking, make sure I can finish.
You certainly.
Okay. I think that the administration and the teachers used a responsible process by which they determined which curriculum they will use. I think that the votes have been, I don't know, 50 or 52-48. And there might be some concern as to whether there was some alleged coercion from the administration as to which curriculum that the teachers had to pick. I'm not sure what coercion. It's not like the school gets money from a certain, I mean, they have to pay for this. I don't know what arm twisting lie in the world we would use some level of coercion to pick a certain curriculum. I don't understand what that would gain from any of us. But we've used a year-long process. The teachers voted overwhelmingly for a certain curriculum. I don't understand what the issue is. I'm sure it's, no, of course it's not 100%. Not everyone's going to like the curriculum. Not all the teachers are going to like it. But I don't have the same concerns. Of course, there are concerns about our scores. I think everyone here on this board has concerns about our scores.
That's what the point is, Matt. It's not the point. No one up here is saying that the administration coerced the teachers in voting for a math curriculum.
Rebecca suggested that.
No, she didn't. What
I
she
didn't
said
use
was,
that
she
word.
did not say coercion. And you know what?
That's a
We're
specific
trying to have a
word.
nice conversation here
I agree.
about
And
things.
you
And
keep butting in.
No,
I've let
but-
you two talk for probably
that's
half
not
hour
fair to
now.
even say
Of
that.
course it is.
No
You guys
one
have
said
taken,
that.
you
We don't
guys
have to
have
have
begun for this whole
permission to
conversation.
speak.
Okay.
Nobody's been able to speak.
All right, everybody.
Let's make a motion to call the question.
Okay, we have a motion to call a question. Second?
Second.
Or we have a second.
Second here.
I second it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Motion to call the question, let's do roll call.
Okay?
Mr. Tanner?
Yes.
Ms. Drury?
What are we voting on?
Motion to call the question.
To bring the
The
motion to
motion
table
on the
it
floor.
We
to.
can
Yeah,
vote.
to vote the motion the primary motion is the motion to table the issue by Representative Stewart, seconded by you. This is a motion to call that question, to vote on that question now and in discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Crumbaker? Ms. Stewart?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, motion is to table the purchase of the math textbooks. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
The motion fails.
I make a motion to approve the recommendation of the administration.
There's a motion to approve the textbook purchase by the recommendation of the administration. Is there a second? There's a motion, a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed?
No, me.
And motion carries. All right, we're going to move on to the budget now.
Yes, next we have the consideration of the FY17 budget. I believe Lori has given everyone copies of that information.
Yes, yes.
I didn't know if I just was
I'm
the only one
sorry.
that had it.
I'm sorry, I need to pull the folder again. Scott and I are already confused on, pull out the latest new information. First thing we're gonna look at is, and I promise I'm not gonna go through the whole foundation formula. I just,
Thank you, Lord.
you're welcome. But I do want to show you some updated information that we got today. We talked on June the 8th, well, not to rehash a lot of that, but we talked on June the 8th that, you know, in a district that has declining enrollment, there's really never any reason for you to base your current year, in this case the 16-17 funding, you wouldn't want to base your 16-17 funding on your current average daily attendance for that year, because the formula allows you to go back at least 2 years to get your best numbers for your ADA. Well, in trying to meet state statute and regulations on the formula where they can no longer adjust the percentage at which the formula is funded, so we don't work on a proration factor anymore. They have to tweak other numbers. Well, when you look at the formula as overall, there's some key components in this, and you look at one, your average daily attendance of your students, and then you look at your free and reduced percentage. There's a January count that's done every year, and that January number goes into the formula. You do a December count on your special education students, and I think it's an October count on your limited English proficient. But those are our annual counts. And so the powers that be that made the formula said, well, you know, if you have a high number of free and reduced, a high number of special ed, and a high number of limited English proficient students in your district, common sense tells you it's going to cost more to educate those students. So they put into the formula a percentage that you put your count in, and if you're above a certain number, then it adds to the ADA. Those kids count for more on the ADA. So we're declining enrollment. So your big number in all of this is just your basic average daily attendance of all your students. Who's here today and who's not here today, and that's what you want to look at. But when they changed the percentages for 16, 17 to tweak this formula, they added so much more weight in our case, especially to the free and reduced, we get quite a few more numbers to our weighted average daily attendance, which generates money for us. So we talked about all that on the 8th. So all that was good. I told you it was a loophole. I told you that at some point it would catch up. Well, I think everybody in the state started saying, hey, we want to estimate our average daily attendance. So from the May finance memo that we get all of our numbers out of, to the June finance memo, which came out last Thursday, to my conversation today with one of the finance gurus at DESE, this second number on your formula line here on the top one, when we looked at it on the 8th, the state adequacy target was at $6,241. If you look at the second page, they dropped it to $6,110. So what that did for us individually is we were looking at collecting $12,800 on the formula, and now we're looking at collecting just under $12,500. So lost about $307,000. Now, this is tentative.
If you said this while I was out of the room, I apologize, I took a little break. What causes them to make that change?
Because here's the official statement.
Okay.
Due to the uncertainty that remains concerning several of the formula components, the state adequacy target that seems most accurate to use for budgeting purposes at the current time is $6,110. When I asked for clarification today because I'd never gotten an answer on was truly going to benefit us to estimate, I hadn't gotten an answer in the last 3 weeks from the state on that, so I called today, and when I called, the answer on whether we should estimate or not is, can you call us back in the fall? Because we need to see what everybody's going to do. And in the meantime, if you want to be conservative, because this is what you always get from the State Department and the federal, be as conservative or as I don't remember the word they use, but anyway, you can go high end or low end. Here's your range, but what the finance report does not say is that this seems to be the best number. What we were told on the phone today is use the low end and hope it gets better in the fall. So I just wanted you to see how one number in the formula can swing that for us.
So, when they're saying what they're waiting for, is that legislation or is it
they're going to look
revenues?
They're going to look at revenues. They're also going to look at what summer school average daily attendance was, because if people ran large summer schools where essentially you're skinning everybody in the door that you can to drive up that ADA, that all hits that pot of money really hard. So they want to see that summer school ADA. And what Deborah told me today on the phone when she asked if I would call back in the fall, they're actually going to wait till that third week in September when they do their September membership count. That's one of their first real numbers on how many kids we've got enrolled in the state of Missouri. They're going to look and see how that applies to that pot of money. And you all know, sometimes it's like being in debt. Of course, I always try to be conservative on revenue. So Tom and I met this afternoon and scrambled a little bit. We could have left it where it was. We're fortunate, and this is one of the very reasons, historically our reason for this late budget meeting is to wait to see what that June payment is. We have seen this on the proration factor before. I didn't expect it this year because they're not supposed to be adjusting big numbers on their formula at this point. That's a big change to go from 6,214 to 6,110. You can see what it does to the numbers. Now, that does not mean, the board needs to understand that there is good potential that number will get better. But if we stick to our historic budgeting method where we are giving the most realistic number we can for revenues today and expenditures when we adopt the budget and go with conservative on the revenues, then it would not be fair, or we would be out of our norm to not go ahead and adjust that. So we have adjusted those accordingly. There are some things in the budget that were, actually revenues are up today, 163,000, so you can imagine before our phone conversation this afternoon how good the budget looked. This has happened to us before, it was just with assessed valuation. But anyway, I just wanted you to see, we're not gonna go through line item by line item, but you can just see, nothing else changes. The second page is just the data entry page where we plug in our numbers, and the only thing that I changed was that state adequacy target, and that's how much it affected that one line item. So the next thing you have in your budget is the same revenue spreadsheet you had before. We've just got a 627 update column, and then the variance in revenue. And the first thing you'll see on the first page is I'm presenting today 163,000 more in revenue than we did on the 8th. There are also a couple of areas I want to point out. On that first page, we talked about Prop C. If you look at the June numbers for Prop C sales tax money in the June finance report, they're still saying great potential for it to pay at the $977,000. We actually had some cleanup in our attendance for the 15-16 school year. The ladies that work on attendance have been working very hard. Our actual average daily attendance for this year went up a little bit, so our Prop C money, where we thought if we did the high end, again, the budget's on the low end, but if we went on the high end, when we met on the 8th, we had thought there would be potential for about 81,000 more in revenue if it actually pays on that high end. That number now is up to 95,500. So there's a $100,000 swing that we can have on that one line item pretty easily if the sales tax money holds. But again, you don't know that until you get into February of 2017. So our tendency has always been to budget on the low end and hope for the high end. But I just wanted to point out there that that is one area in the budget that we're very conservative. When you look at current taxes above that, I didn't change any numbers there.
Hey Lori, can I ask you a question really quickly about average daily attendance? Since we're having to add teachers to our lower level grade levels because those classes seem to be much bigger than what we've seen in the previous years, is there any idea if our average daily attendance will go up next year? Any idea? Do we know about kindergarten? What size of class?
I don't know the exact number.
I don't know the exact number. There's not anything in the back of my mind that was a red flag that we were dropping.
Okay.
Kindergarten had a rough year this year as far as attendance went. So if anything, we probably have the means to improve that.
If I can, I just had to ask Jenny and Sally today about the enrollment. And they said, of course, you never know for sure, but they said right now that they're right where they were last year in terms of who's enrolled and such. So I think they're looking at very similar numbers.
And that's been pretty steady then since March. It's just kind of staying static, so that class size is probably going to be pretty similar. And like I said, they struggled with their attendance because they had some very serious health issues with their student population this year. So, and just a hard flu season and different things, lots of stress, those types of things. So kindergarten seemed to get hit really hard on attendance. I know Jenny and them were very disappointed in some of their numbers when we look at the monthly stuff. And so if anything, if that class size stays static and we have a healthier year, then we should see some improvement there. There's no change from the 8th to today on current taxes. I just want to remind the board the assumptions that we're making on the current and delinquent taxes there. We're assuming a 2% growth in assessed valuation overall. That's low compared to what we've had the last couple of years, but if you take and spread that out historically, that would be the average increase. We are projecting based on just about a 95.5% collection rate because that's what this year was. Historically, our collection rate is 97 or 98%. So I don't know if this was just a bad year for collection or if we're going to start seeing a new norm. But this is another area that we've just gone very middle of the road. We've gone very middle of the road on growth in assessed valuation. It will not surprise me at all if we see more growth than 2%. And it would not surprise me at all if we did not go back up closer to 97% in our collection rate. But again, those are not things that I know today. I just can base it on what the status is right now. if we were to grow more in assessed valuation, or if we were to collect that extra 2%, that's easily $200,000 more that will come in on the revenue side. So in the first three line items in the budget, you've got a $300,000 possibility of more money coming in. We're painting the grim picture here. With it being June the 27th, we should have already gotten a phone, I'll probably jinx this. Let's see if this is real good. We should have already gotten a phone call from our assessor that there was going to be a decrease, and this is not a reevaluation year, so we should see growth.
You know, we're losing our assessor in Madrid County.
Yeah, that makes me
I hope
nervous
he's
for the
not
following
slacking
year.
A little bit, but.
Yeah, I've never been through an assessor change. I've heard horror stories, but that won't affect us till FY18, so we're good. We'll worry about that then. On the second page, I increased student activities a little bit. Sometimes I'm too conservative, I will admit that. When I looked at 5 years of history and what we actually are finishing the year at, I added $40,000 there for what the collections should be. You'll see that horrible change at the bottom of page 2 where we're losing $376,000 in basic formula money on the 5311 code. Classroom trust fund, on the other hand, is going to go up a little bit because it pays based on ADA, so we got a little bit more money there. That went up $6,000. That goes a long ways to offset the $376,000 loss. Vocational SETC career tech payment. That's one I'm always very nervous about. That's one I'm always worried about on that June payment coming in. It came in and it came in strong. And then I talked with the State Department and they thought that my estimate for $390 going into next year, based on the programs and participation that we're going to have, was a little low. So we added $30,000 there. Good news on direct services and administrative billing that we do for Medicare services that are done in the district. The second semester, we've been right at $35,000 and what we've brought in revenue on that. And in the second half of the semester, we did quite a bit of direct billing services, so that's going to go up about $10,000. So that will bring some more in there. On the next page, on IDEA money, we weren't showing any rollover because we thought we would be able to invoice and get the money in by June 30. They're going to still owe us $100,000 for FY16 that's not going to come until after July 1. There's the little tweak there in food services between breakfast and the lunch program. It pretty much offsets each other. And then on the last page was something that was very disheartening to us last week, but it sure makes the numbers look better for next year now that it's gone over. We did our due diligence, just like we said, on June the 9th. When we met on the 8th, we said we're going to meet tomorrow, we're going to invoice our federal programs, and we spent the day doing that. And we got a phone call last week or week before that said that the state of Missouri had exceeded their allocation for the month of June and they couldn't pay us our $352,000 in Title I money. So it won't be in June, but it will come in July. So that has been reflected now in the budget. So even though we lost on the state formula on some current projections with some of the other adjustments we had, I'm presenting another $163,420 in revenues. Like I said, there's some areas that are still very conservative. I'm just not comfortable giving you any higher numbers in the areas that were conservative. The good thing is one of our biggest factors where I'm being conservative is in the sales tax money that we will bring in based on our assessed valuation. We will know that by our August meeting. We always adjust the budget, whether it's for the good or for the bad, in September when we set our levy. There's no reason for me to think at any point at this time with the measures that were taken on debt service with the early payoff and those types of things, that 21 cents should stay flat on debt service. And I don't see anything in assessed, unless we had a huge growth in assessed valuation, that would be any reason that we would have to decrease that levy. So I'm assuming the levy is flat. We'll know those numbers early on, which will help us then plan for some things that we're going to talk about on the expenditure side. The formula is just going to, I couldn't leave it as it was. I may be I'm accused a lot of being a negative Nelly. I may be being a negative Nelly here. But when you have such a broad statement that says, you probably just ought to budget this, there's just too many unknowns, I'm gonna take that and go with the low end. That I consider it my job to protect us financially, and I think that's the right financial projection to make, is just to assume the worst and hope that when we get to December, January, February next year, they go, oh, well, we went ahead and increased that number and now you're gonna draw in more money. So, we're coming back to playing the proration game, just on a different line item. Any questions on revenues? Okay. Expenditures. We had already made some changes, and then we made some more changes today, after we lost money. We kind of scrambled. So again, same information that you had on June the 8th, just a new column for the 27th with some explanations, and then you'll see to the far right what the actual cuts are. So from June the 8th to this evening, we have cut out of the budget, expenditure-wise, $359,238. And those are in some pretty big chunks throughout the budget. The first one is, flip over to page 3. We will look at technology. It is the administration's recommendation this evening that on the iLearn budget, we leave in the budget $36,739. And that we cut at this point in time to be approved this evening, $190,238. Now let me explain why if we were going to cut, why we left anything in there. That $36,739 is cases for the freshman iPads that are going to be redistributed. No, sorry, for the seniors, iPads that were turned back in. So these seniors have had these iPads for 4 years with this case on it. Those iPads are going to be distributed down to lower grade levels. So in that $36,739 are 250 new cases to be put on those iPads to be distributed down to various other grade levels. The charging carts, one big charging cart for the library at 7th and 8th grade center, and then power rack chargers that can set in the advisory classrooms for 7th graders. And that was because the decision was made for the 7th graders not to take those iPads home for the first part, a certain part of the first part of the school year, until they had had some citizenship training, digital citizenship training. And if so, we're going to leave them at school, we've got to have the ability for them to be charged and usable when they come in. So that cost of those carts are in there. And then for the high school students, it was requested that we purchase a particular app for them that they thought would be beneficial. It's a Comic Life app. So those costs are what total that $36,739. What's involved in the cut that we're presenting this evening is the replacement schedule items that would historically be given to the board next May or June. It is not the intent of the administration to give up on that. It's just that with the revenue side of things, we thought it would be more prudent of us to look at live numbers, live payments in the fall, see how our tax collections were coming in, look at things how our utilities are actually running for the first semester. What is our property and liability insurance bill? What did it come in December when it renewed? So all of these things, we can look at that first semester. This is really no different than what we've done with school buses for several years, where we've come back in January or February and said, hey, the year's running good, let's buy the buses. This will give us an opportunity, and this is a year we got to buy buses. So we're putting those on the front end. So we're actually would come back to the board in January, February, or March of next year with a budget adjustment to put this back in if it's feasible to do so with the same spending time frame that we've always had. Because keep in mind, we've always done that replacement schedule at the end of the fiscal year to ensure that we had the knowledge if the program was working and the knowledge of where we stood financially and whether or not we could buy that. So that's the two largest cuts, or the largest cut there. Below that, on computer hardware, we've cut $50,000 out of the budget. We've just told Eddie in technology that he needs to, again, a lot of his purchases are in the spring. He needs to buy what he needs out of his budget to keep us going and be successful technology-wise But if there were some things that he would put off in the spring, we're gonna go ahead and pull 50,000 out of that and reevaluate. So these are all things that if the numbers get better financially on the revenue side, we will come back to the board with budget adjustments in all of these areas. The next one is several pages back. And some of these are minor tweaks. I think Tom thought I might have gotten a little carried away with some of these. But if you look at several pages back in the 2214 code, if one thing about them losing money on the formula, if we lose money on the formula side, well, then we can decrease the amount that we spend in 1% money for professional development. So I cut $6,000 there. That's what the calculation worked out to. On that same page at the bottom, you'll see a $5,000 cut. John at Central Supply has gone through the art requisitions now that they've collected all of the inventory from the buildings and put it all back in one place. And there's about $5,000 that he can fulfill out of our stock for the requisition. So we've reduced that number. And again, $11,000 isn't getting us very far, but every little bit helps. On the next page, you'll see a $50,000 cut to maintenance. One thing that we're going to hold off on until the spring, we were waiting on Con Edison, who is the company that we worked with for some of our energy saving projects in the past. We had asked them to look into this green energy package and talk to BMU on how that actually was going to work with our meters to see if there really was going to be a return on investment in 20 months. We went ahead and cut that $15,000 for this point. It's something that we were going to hold till late spring and possibly not even do anyway, pending what we find out from the company. So we cut that $15,000 and then we cut another basically $39,000 in windows that were going to be done in the spring. They're going to be on hold again, pending how everything looks, but Mike says he can function with that out. We will he'll rob Peter to pay Paul on various line items to get done what has to be done. And if we have something catastrophic happen, it's like every other year, we'll come back to the board and say this has happened. So we cut $50,000 out of technology extra. In addition to iLearn, we cut $50,000 out of maintenance. We cut $50,000 out of food service purchase services, and I probably would have done that anyway, simply because when you look at what we actually served in meals this year and paid out to Aramark, that $1.6 million that we had in there was going to be a little high. They were down about 200 meals a day at the high school this past year, and this is because we pay on a per meal cost. I hesitated to reduce it in June because the numbers were too fresh, but Hugh and I have been back through them 3 times now, so I feel that $50,000 cut there is not going to be. It's not going to be detrimental to the program in any manner, and will actually almost pay for the equipment that we need to buy there. So that was just a good move, regardless of what happened on the revenue side. So I also moved on that same page on food services, the $8,000. We talked about this last month, the CPI training, and here I am in the room, and I still don't remember what it stands for.
Crisis Prevention Institute training.
There you go. That's the training. We can pay for that with 1% money that we're required to spend, so there's no sense in leaving that $8,000 line item out by itself when you're trying to plug holes, so we moved that over. So that's how we got to the $359,000 in cuts. So now you've got a new summary page.
Lori, before you go on to that, and this may be more of a time question, what about some of the new requirements the state has had, specifically like the CPR training for the students? Is that
Many of those requests are not going to go into effect until 2018.
Oh, is that right?
So,
Okay.
actually, it'll be July 1st of 2017. And Chuck and I have talked about this, such as, like the CPR training, which is like 30 minutes of training for each and every student. We're talking about the bullying prevention, which we all have to adopt a new policy in order to cover that. In addition to suicide prevention and awareness, those things will have to be addressed both with our staff and also our students. And there's some other things that have been brought up. I know with dyslexia, that's being brought up. There's going to be a study group task force that's going to be put into place to study that over the next year or 2, I believe it is. There's several other items, but as far as any type of real cost, I don't know what it's going to be.
And we'll be able to evaluate whether we're going to be able to absorb those trainings internally, or if we're gonna have to
Well,
hire them out?
Yeah, well, take like CPR, I think we can pretty much do that ourselves, simply through a program that, I've been talking with Nike Water about that, and she has a program available, if they're gonna have training, I think we can just use. I know the American Heart Association as well has contacted me about items that they have. So either we can do some things for ourselves, go to groups such as the American Heart Association, in order to accommodate the needs of our kids.
The other thing to think about is Missouri Delta, because
Mm-hmm.
Kevin does the CPR training for the Boy Scouts, and he borrows their equipment, dubbings, that kind of stuff, to do the training. So there may be some,
Well, I'm sure we'll have plenty of
Collaborating there.
outside sources in order to help with things like that.
Okay. I just didn't know about how it would affect what we're looking into right now, so, I'm sorry.
Jim, the way Tom answered that question when he said that'll be an FY18 issue, back to your question on what was the state waiting on the formula, what were some of the unknowns. I think that's going to be a big part of it is, even though they said Senate Bill 586 and what came with it would not actually affect us till FY18, I think they're still scrambling behind the scenes to see what that Senate bill is going to look like in the formula, and they're putting the brakes on the front end, trying not to pay out too much in the prior year so the cuts can be less drastic. I mean, they've already given us some grim numbers. They don't want those to come to fruition, much less those get worse. So I think that's part of why they're holding back on that. Okay, on the new summary page, the top half of the sheet is showing you numbers that you had on June 8th versus what we're going to talk about today. Now, the bottom half of the sheet, those deficits have all changed because I only wanted you to see what we're currently looking at. So salaries for 15-16, we're working on the final 2 payrolls today. We know pretty much what they're going to pay out. Those went up a little bit from the 8th, and that was simply because we paid out some stipends with collaborative money, primarily in the last 2 weeks where teachers have been working on various things, so that went up some. It's hard for me not to be conservative, but savings from retirees versus new hires, the estimate on paper, when you look at, we hired Joe to replace Amy, and we replaced Brian to replace Matt. I mean, we've laid out what they make versus what the other one made and taken the difference. So the numbers that we have on paper, and I think we're down to, at this point in time, we only have one more position to fill. The savings from retirees versus new hires was $254,480. When we did the June 8th presentation, we still had some unknowns, so I had been conservative with the savings at $200,000, putting $250,000 in at this point for those savings. Same positions that we talked about before. 2 elementary positions were added to control class size for $76,159. Our plan is to put into place, using focus funds, the specific type of assistant that you have heard Alicia talk about that's been so successful at Southeast, that type of individual at Matthews for $15,000. Expand the elementary in-school suspension program using 2 550 retirees are our plan at this point. The cost on that would be $30,000. Because of some of the issues with a particular student coming into the kindergarten center, we know we're going to need an additional personal aid. The estimate on that is 14. We're still to the point that I just want to keep saying this, it's not in the numbers, but remember that we're not replacing a speech path person going into next year. So we may come to the board very early on when we get everybody enrolled next year and Lynn starts looking at caseloads. We may come in for a SLPA, an assistant. That position runs about $22,000 depending on their experience, and we would come back to you as a budget adjustment. So just know that at this point we're okay. Some of the early indicators for enrollment looks like we may have to come back to the board and hire that position in the early fall. But they're not in the numbers at this time. The co-curricular changes that were proposed total $18,000, and you can see kind of a summary listed below there. Added a football assistant coach for 7th and 8th grade, increased percentages for 7th and 8th grade football, 9th grade basketball, varsity softball, varsity track, varsity volleyball, boys soccer, and all levels of wrestling, all grade levels of wrestling, assistant and head coach percentages were increased so that we would be more competitive with area co-curricular schedules. The cost on that is estimated to be $18,000. Moved to the right on the salary schedule, we upped that a little bit. That 5% raise added that we gave for the current year made that movement to the right a little bit more that I didn't have in my calculations, so we upped that. And then after Ms. Hollifield gave her presentation at the last meeting on Career Ladder, and I actually looked at her sheet instead of just thinking that's something I don't have to present tonight, thank goodness. I went, oh crap, we gotta add some money. Because we have 20 people that are going to be eligible to go from level 2 to level 3, which is a great thing because we get that many more volunteer hours out of them to go to our students, but that's a big chunk of money, and overall I think she went up about 27 participants, so we've reflected that in the budget now. So that number is reflected as a single line item there. That $60,000 is the increase we're anticipating. Now that doesn't mean that everybody will write that plan, but that is the potential for what the expenditure could be. We've adjusted a line item in the revenues to show that increase, and then also down at the bottom, not to get too far off track, but down at the bottom, we've increased where the salary committee recommendation was a step 3% to fully fund the career ladder, then we had to increase that number as well. So it's up to $460,000 now to fully fund that career ladder. So that gave us new salary estimate for 16-17 of $18,598,959. Same type of scenario for actual benefits. Benefits went down. Part of that will be the savings that we experienced on summer checks for the health insurance, because you have 3 months of summer checks at that new rate, which helped. Our unemployment was down. Our work comp was down for the year, and then just some minor tweaks on the retirement on the health insurance savings. So we actually are coming in lower than what I had projected at $5,425,993. Savings from retirees went up because the savings went up. New positions on co-curricular, you can see the new positions in co-curricular benefits, you can see the cost on that. That lower insurance premium for annually is going to result in a savings of $200,000. Move to the right, benefits, and then it looks like we're going to have some new interest in health insurance, so we're projecting about 10 new people coming onto the plan. So that is just under $60,000. Then you see the increase in benefits on Career Ladder. The next line item, the 2016-17 purchase services, supplies, equipment, and debt. You will see that new updated number. We went from 10.1 million to 9.7, and that's a reflection of those cuts that we just talked about. That's everything that we talked about on the spreadsheet prior to this. That's how we got to that number. So that gives us a new total expenditure amount of 33.6 million, and the new revenues with that, with the loss in the revenue from the formula, but the other increases, we're looking at 33.7. So we still managed, even with that loss of the formula. Like I said, I had a conversation late Thursday afternoon with Rebecca and said, oh, the numbers look a lot better. I met Jim on Wednesday and said, oh, the numbers are going to look a lot better. We're still too good. They still look better. They just don't look as better as they did when I left here yesterday afternoon late. But the 2016-2017 budget balance prior to the raise would be $72,222 and a surplus. The other thing at the far top right, change in June 27th, we're not going to have a deficit for this year at all. That happens to us a lot because we're conservative on the revenues and we historically don't expend line items. And even I thought with the loss of the Title I not coming in this fiscal year that we might come in under in revenues and we might go ahead and realize that deficit. But we still got our 2A payments. The vocational payment came in higher than we thought. We got several payments. We got several payments last week on the Medicaid that I was talking about, and they add up quickly. You know, 10,000 here and 12,000 here, so that added up on money that we didn't think coming in. So we're actually going to wind up this year with growth. We ended last year at 15.1. We're going to end this year at 15.2. It's not much. I think it's 47,000. But it's better than the $213,000 deficit that we had anticipated. And keep in mind, that is also with some of the debt service changes that we made. So we had a very decent year. So we're setting very good with resources at 15.2. So that number is up from June 8th. So now you see the various scenarios at the bottom, the same ones that we showed you before. It was the vote of the salary committee to make a recommendation that you fund a step 3% and then fully fund the career ladder. We did hear feedback from some teachers after that committee meeting that once they had taken that back to their buildings, that was not necessarily popular with some of the younger staff, that would not affect, obviously, because you can't be on career ladder until you're in your 6th year. Some even veteran teachers had said, well, I don't know how I would find time to do the additional hours, so putting that money into the raise, I wouldn't necessarily write a plan for more hours. So that was some of the feedback that we heard. I think the biggest concern of the administration is there's a very large dollar amount to touch about 160 to 180 staff members in a year that you're looking at adopting a deficit budget of some format regardless of what raise you get. That is the salary committee recommendation, and that is why it's on the form. You can see the cost of that is $1.4 million. That would take the deficit to 1.3, and that would take your fund balances down to 13.8 at the end of the year. Then you have various other scenarios. The administration does not feel like you can consider anything higher than a 3, as much as we would like to do that. That 5% was very appreciated this year. It's just, you can see how quickly the numbers start to add up. I'll remind the board that you don't have to worry about minimum wage. We don't have to do anything with an odd cents, 10 cents or 15 cents added to that support staff, because minimum wage did not go up in January. So the scenarios that we're looking from this point forward are either a step only, which everybody just gets their year of service step, or a step 1%, step 2%, and a step 3%, and you can see the various costs. Those range from $368,000 to $965,000, and you can see then what they start doing to the balances there. With the worst case scenario, as far as deficit being, would be $892,000. So one of the things we need to talk about is some deficit spending consideration. One thing our board has never done, and at some point we probably ought to consider it, today is not the day, but at some point we probably want to put on the books what we are comfortable with the minimum balance. The State Department, when you do the annual Secretary of the Board report, they take your balances in Fund 1 and Fund 2 and look at that as a percentage of what your expenditures were in Fund 1 and Fund 2, which is basically salaries and benefits, your operating costs. It leaves out debt, it leaves out capital. And they develop a percentage, and we usually stay anywhere from 35 to 39%. So when people around the state look at the various spreadsheets that come out by Missouri State Teachers Association or the National Education Association, any of the teacher union groups, and you look at us and we run 36 and 39%, they were like, well, Sikeston's sitting on a lot of money. Well, we are sitting on a lot of money. I mean, we're sitting on $15.2 million, but we also are in a situation where it's declining enrollment. We have some unknowns again with our foundation formula. And we're a district that is very dependent on that foundation formula. Not all districts are that way. A lot of districts are hold harmless and off the formula because they don't need it, because they grow so much in local tax effort every year, they don't need that. But a good rule of thumb, if you want to get away from the percentage, and some school districts say, well, we're not going to go below 20%, and some school districts say we're not going to go below 10%. The only rule that's out there is if you go below 3%, the state's going to take you over. That's the only rule, is you can't go below 3% because then the state comes in and takes over. And that's what's happened at some of the schools in St. Louis and Kansas City. What we've always looked at as a district is a good rule of operating balances would be a minimum. Your minimum balance needs to be 3 months of operating expenses. That gets you through July through November in paying your salaries and your benefits and your front-end costs, if you gotta buy buses or textbooks or whatever you're doing, that gets your front-end costs out of the way before you start actually collecting that local tax revenue, because they start coming in mid to late December and run through January. Your railroad utility money is a huge, I mean, we're at 900-something thousand is what we're budgeting. That historically comes in February. You might see a little bit in September, but the big amount of that comes in February. So in school business, a lot of your revenues come in later, so you want that 3 months up front. So if you look at our projected revenues that we're projecting for FY17, 3 months of operating is going to run about 8.4, I rounded to 8.5 million. And we have a current fund balance of 15.2 million. So that's the only reason we're sitting here with any recommendation for any raise that shows a deficit on the books, is because the minimum amount that we need on the books is 8.5. Now, I don't sleep well if it's that low. We've been there. Tom's laughing. I mean, we've been there. We've been at 7.5 before, and it's not a pretty sight. You freeze salaries and you do whatever, and we don't want to get back into that situation. But 8.5 would be a comfortable amount. We have 15.2, so that's why we want the board to even consider looking at some raises. The other thing you got to look at is, it would not be good business, and I would never recommend to any board of education or any board that I was on, I would never recommend, just not a good business practice, to deficit spend to fund raises. So there are various things that you have to look at there. And the reason for that is because once you put those raises in, they compound on you. I mean, if we give a percentage this year and we give a percentage next year, then that percentage compounds on top of that other percentage. And the only way you're going to control that is to, one, freeze your salaries, or two, start, not filling positions through attrition, or worse, ripping, because you don't have the money to do that, and that's not a situation that you want to get into. So there are various things that we look at. So some of the things you need to look at before you make a decision on the raise is, when you look at FY17 specific one-time expenditures, we have several of them in there. The iLead team equipment, we talked about that last month. There's $22,000 worth of MacBooks or higher gigabyte iPads that we have that are going to be a one-time purchase. That's not something we're going to buy every year. That's to fund the two teams that we have now, and we have no indication at this time that we would expand that. The Chromebooks that we talked about, there's $93,000 that we don't have to expend. It's logical to expend it, or that would have been one of the cuts we brought in here today. That's to replace the laptops that we are consistently throwing $18,000 to $20,000 to $25,000 a year on batteries, and they still didn't get us through testing this year. But that is not something that we're going to come back to the board every year and ask you to spend $100,000 on Chromebooks, because we haven't bought laptops since 2005, probably, whenever we started EMINS. The stadium poles, that was approved last month. That's $287,000 cost. Now that doesn't mean that I'm not naive. That doesn't mean that something's not going to come up in future years that we have to scramble and have a big ticket item for a safety issue. But again, that's one reason you have reserves. But we do know that there's $287,000 in the budget that we're not going to bring to the board next year. Same way with the handicap rails for the stadium improvements, $40,000. Southeast boilers, $35,000. There's nothing on the horizon that says we'll have to buy another boiler for a couple of 3 years. This was anticipated. This was something we knew was coming down the pipe. We milked it for as long as we could milk it, and it's finally met its end. So there's nothing to say that we won't have another boiler that has to be replaced somewhere in the future, but that's not something that we're coming to the board every year with. And then we got $50,000 worth of furniture in the FY17 budget, simply because we've not bought furniture for a decade. We've bought little things, but we've not bought any significant amount of desks. We've got Z building over here, and we just send people over there to go through and just rehash the desks and rehash the seats until they fall apart. And so we've got $50,000 in there that we're buying this year because we feel it's time, and the principals made their argument on why they needed it for their teachers, but that's not something that we anticipate putting $50,000 of classroom equipment in every year. So when you look at all of those things, they're $527,000. So those are what I consider for FY17 a one-time expenditure. So when you start looking at these deficits at the bottom of the page, you have one-time expenditures that offset the majority of that cost. Those are something that we could control and not purchase if the funding were to become a worse situation than what we have. You gotta keep in mind on the revenues. The reason I'm sitting here today telling you is that we didn't realize $213,000 deficit for this year is because, once again, we're conservative on the revenues and we historically don't expend on the expenditure side. So just in, and I've already hit on this a little bit, so I'm sorry to beat a dead horse, but on Prop C, the foundation formula, and then our local tax collections, you can see how quickly the swing in revenues can go to the good. We've got $95,000 on Prop C that could come in. The foundation formula, we're being conservative today, but they're hoping the number gets better so they can swing back up that $300,000 by the middle of the year. And then your local tax collections, everything is on the low end, middle of the road, both on percentage that's being collected and the growth on the assessed valuation. So you easily are going to gain $200,000. So there's $600,000 on 3 line items that can come in better in revenue than what we're projecting is today. And then expenditures, historically, because we're zero-based, but there are areas, we've talked about this before in budget meetings, we're zero-based, so everybody starts with zero on every line in the budget and say, what do I need? But you have a maintenance operations plant department that if they don't make some estimates on what they think they need for HVAC repair or parking lot repair, then they can't function. The board would have to be meeting, it would be the hiring season year round. You would have to meet once a week to approve if they don't make some assumptions. The same way in technology. They make some assumptions on what they need to buy in license and what they need to buy in server replacement parts and those types of things, just so they can function without the board having to meet to approve. You never want to get in a situation where something goes down today and we have to wait until we get a quorum before you can repair something. So there, even though we're zero-based budgeting, there's some assumptions, and historically we come in 1 to 2%. About $400,000 is what we've run the last few years. Now, with some of the cuts we've made today, I don't think it's realistic to say that the expenditures next year would come in under $400,000. But I do think it's reasonable to look closer to that 0.5% or that 1%. So you got a swing in expenditures of $170,000 to $339,000. So if you had, instead of the perfect storm where everything goes wrong, which is what I always assume is going to happen, if you had, well, I do, Jim, that's me, I can't help it. So it's going to happen the perfect storm where everything goes wrong, and if you had a good year where the revenue comes in and your expenditures stay low, if you're looking at a step in 3%, which takes your deficit to $897,000, you're going to offset $600,000 of that with revenue. If things go well, you're going to have another $170,000 in savings. So you've gotten very close to having a break-even budget. It's just not anything I can give you on paper today because there's too many unknowns. The only reason I'm still comfortable with that is you've got $500,000 in one-time costs that I know I'm not going to bring to the board next year. That's offsetting a huge amount of that deficit. And the bottom line is this. You got $15.2 million in your balances, and even though you can't say you want a deficit spend to fund a salary raise, it would be hard to not recommend, for the administration not to recommend, a good cost of living adjustment while you've got $15.2 million when we know we can drop to 8.5. So even if you drop your balances to 14.3 million, you're still at 5.8 million above what you need in reserves for your 3 months operating. Now, all of this can change. We've been down that road. Those of you that have been on the board and the others of you have heard the horror stories. This can change overnight if things, but you do what you have to do at that time. Our utilities are going up, which means our staff utilities are going up in their homes. Groceries are going up. I mean, you have all of these cost of living adjustments, so we're just not in a situation where we can't recommend a raise, even though we've had some bad news on the revenue side. We still think there's enough float on that side that we can see some things turn around. In maintenance, in technology, with everything, my only change to my story this year is that we got to buy the buses early, and I still hope we can buy a third one in January. But with the exception of that, we're going to go into this deficit spending and dropping balances down, which are still, like I said, close to $6 million, healthier than what you have to operate for a district our size. we will put the brakes on everything as we would any other year, just because you approve this amount of expenditure, salaries and benefits, whatever you approve tonight, obviously, we're gonna contract and go forward and we'll have that. But in every other area, we're gonna continue to look, and if the numbers are not good, we will put the brakes on various things throughout the year. So it's the administration's recommendation at this point that you consider the step and 3%, realizing again that is deficit spending, but we don't feel we're deficit spending to cover the salaries and benefits because of all the other indicators that we talked about.
We talked a little bit about this, we've had as a goal, I think we've talked about one of the things that the board would like to do is see our teachers' salaries comparable to compete with other area schools, like we're talking Cape, Poplar Bluff, Jackson. Do you know where the 3% step and 3% would put us in comparison?
Where we were weak in our salary schedule, which was one of the reasons behind the 5% increase for this year, was on that front end of the salary schedule. We didn't have that step 1-1 to attract new teachers to come into the district. With the 5% we gave last year, and if we do a 3% this year, that will take our step 1-1 to $32,618. That would be a starting teacher, no experience, bachelor degree, that would be their salary. That puts us about $600 above Poplar Bluff. It puts us about $400 still behind Cape and Jackson. We still got a long ways to catch up with Jackson.
They're at like 34, no way out.
Yeah.
I heard that on the radio just randomly. there.
Our balances are
35.
negative. We
It's like
can't
34,
catch up with them.
something like that.
It's almost 35.
Yeah.
But every other school, if you just say that's
If
an
you
outlier.
take every other school within the surrounding area, we're very, very competitive, based upon last year's 5% raise, and this including this 3%.
And we're still fantastic on the far end. I mean, when you look at their, masters and above salary schedule and where they max out at the bottom, the back end of our schedule is fantastic. We just got to a point where we needed the front end to attract people a little bit better.
Is there any way that this budget could be presented as in the red by like moving, we've got these extra funds in this reserve. Can we not have it as part of the budget proposal, and if there may be some technical things why we can't, put that in as part of the.
What you're doing when you adopt as a board as a whole, when you adopt a deficit fund balance year, you are making a conscious decision to spend down reserves. And that just becomes part of the general statement. Because we have to show FY17 expenditures versus FY17 revenues and what that is. But that's why you show that beginning balance and what it does to your end balance. So the motion becomes you're adopting the budget as presented or whatever is tweaked this evening. And if it's still a deficit, the motion becomes that you adopt that with deficit spending for the FY17, knowing that you are doing a controlled spend down of balances.
And if it all plays out the way you would hope, you never even
touch it, just like this year.
And to your point, I think when we looked at this the other day, our planned deficit for this year's budget that we just completed was going to be a negative 213, and it's ended up being a positive 100, right?
Yeah,
Right.
and that's our norm. I'm one of these years I'm going to have to come in here and say, it didn't work. But that's our norm because we are so conservative on the spending side. And like I said, some of these cuts this evening were hard cuts to make. And it's the administration's full intention to come back at some point during the school year when we've seen better numbers and say, we'd like to put this back in because these are not things we want to give up on. But just to control for it to be a controlled deficit and controlled spend down of those reserves, we felt it was necessary to show that.
And hopefully that'll be clear to anybody who's going to read about
what
we're doing,
yes.
so that it's understood by.
Yes. And like I said, you would not be getting an administration recommendation for a raise if we did not have more reserves than what are needed to substantially more reserves to even be at a safe operating balance. Like I said, I'm not comfortable with them getting too low. If you just had the mundane day-to-day operation stuff in there, there's another $200,000 of items in Mike Brown's budget for maintenance that are safety upgrades that if it were a grim year, those would not be in the budget. Those would be things, we need them. It's things we should be doing. But basically, we're spending our reserves to do building maintenance at this point and various other projects and to keep our technology up to date. If we were looking, if I couldn't find anything in the budget that explained the deficit other than the raise, then we would not be recommending a raise tonight.
Why did you cut, if we have this much money in reserves, why did you cut that out of the budget? Why would, well, how much was it that you cut, 300 and something thousand? If we have this much and we're going to approve a deficit anyway, why cut the 300,000?
To offset the cuts that we saw in the revenue, just to try to get it as balanced as possible before we looked at anything with raises, knowing that we've got something coming down the pike in 2 years with that Senate Bill 386 that we could lose more revenue. It's just a controlled spend on what we're doing.
So with the Senate bill coming down, does it not make you nervous to spend down now?
Anytime we spend down makes me
I mean,
nervous.
I'm just saying for the possibility of that coming. Does that not make you nervous to recommend this tonight, knowing that that's possible, that that's going to come and we're going to lose that funding?
That doesn't make me any more nervous than any other year we've sat in this room doing a budget, because even though I'm very vocal with the negative, probably to a fault, every year we come in with, when you are dependent on a formula that has as many factors as these sheets do, and one line item changes and you lose $376,000, that's just the norm of school finance. The advantage that we have is that we have $15.2 million that has been built into the reserves by our budgeting method, where we've been conservative on revenues and high end on expenditures presented, but then controlled them on the back end, and a little bit of luck along the way on what comes in. So all of this makes me, do I wish we were presenting a balanced budget? Perfect game would be to leave $15.2 million in the bank, never have to touch it for anything, and present a balanced budget and give the staff a 3 or a 5% raise every year. That would be fantastic, but that doesn't happen in the world of school finance. And what we're presenting this evening is how we become the norm, especially for districts our size, in years that, you know, everything is dire straits. You know, you have a whole bunch of stuff break in your district, and they cut your funding, and they don't cut it till June. Then you scramble the next year, and you really tighten everything down, and you start to inch back up to gain that momentum back. Then the next thing you know, you've got more on the books that if you don't do right by your staff, then you've got too much money in the bank. And like I said, they're going to meetings and going, well, here's the amount that you should have gotten for a raise, those types of things. So, am I worried about it being a deficit? You bet I'm worried about it being a deficit. But do I think historically, based on what normally happens in our district, we'll come out okay? And worst case scenario, we deficit spend and we're still at 14 next year, and 8.5 is where we have to be. So then you make harder decisions as you go forward.
Is that, with the Senate bill, I'm not familiar with what happened and what that's about, because the change to the formula. Is that going to be a cut every year or just 1 year?
And I don't know all of it yet, because again, they're still saying things are going to
really know what's going to take place.
Here's the projection. Here's the most honest answer I can give you, is they're saying that where you sit on the formula today, with what they think will happen with Senate Bill 586 and the numbers that they have to tweak in here for our district, because they put out a projection for all the districts. For our district, we have the potential for funding to drop $1.9 million. Now,
Every year?
No.
Or just 1 year?
no, it would be here's where you are, here's what the formula looks like now, and here's the money you draw, and this is the change to the formula, and you drop, and we lose $1.9 million. If that formula however they tweak it, whatever line items they change, that 1.9 million then is where we would stay on funding going forward until they pass another Senate bill or tweak another number and it goes up or down. But that's just a fact of life with school finance. That's, you know, it's just like, you think you get to collect $350,000 in Title I this money because we did everything we were supposed to do on our end, and then they went, oh, well, we can't give you that part of the allocation this month. Now that's going to come down the pike, but those are the unknowns. We've, I could not sit here and present a deficit if we did not have the balances, if we couldn't identify $500,000 of stuff that I know we could have cut, or that I know I won't have to present again. And that if we didn't historically have money that we might expend. Now, whether all that revenue comes in or not, I don't know. That was a huge hit on that formula today. That was sad news to get. So I'm going to be very optimistic that assessed value comes in and we at least recoup the majority of that formula money on our local taxes and we go forward. But again, we know that assessed valuation number here in the next 3 weeks, and we'll, by the end of July, we will have done our levy calculations. So when we come back in August and school's starting up, if there's some bad news on that forefront, there's still a whole lot more that we can stop early on, except school buses. We're going to buy buses. You got to buy buses. We got to have two.
This administration's recommendation for a step plus 3% for all staff.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second on the administration's recommendation, and the chair would just tell Lori you've done a great job on this,
Thank you.
especially with the little late adjustment that had to be made. Any further discussion?
But by approving this motion, we're approving the budget.
We would approve
Yes,
the budget,
which
including
include
the staff
yes.
raises.
That's what we're
Yeah. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori.
Excellent work.
Great job. Next, you have the consideration of heating boiler bids. Mike Brown has put together this packet for you all. He had the bids from 4 different vendors. The bid from Blackmore and Glunt Incorporated, which is out of St. Louis, of $22,015 is the bid that I will recommend to the Board of Education. Let me also say this about the boiler before we go into that. The question was brought up, this is an older building and we're putting in a brand new boiler, but at the same time, we can take that boiler and move it to a different or newer location if we need to at any time. I think the same thing was said, it was not Lori, when we did that at the alternative school as well. So we can take these items and move them out of our existing buildings and take them to another location if we need to. It's a recommendation to accept the Blackmore and Glunt bid for $22,015.
So moved.
Wait, we can discuss it in a second, I have a question.
Is there a second? There's a second? Go ahead.
I was just curious, because I know we like to, and you may not know the answer to this, and I'm not good at reading the spec like that and knowing what I'm looking at. So, did the boiler that was chosen, because we like to use local, you know, area people if we can, it's really an insignificant amount, but is the model that was chosen got more amps or something that is a better or
Yeah, and you're
fit?
really asking the wrong person
See,
on
I'm
that.
not, I don't even know. how to
Mike Brown
ask
would
the
be able to
question,
answer
you know.
that. I do know that he talked about being more efficient, obviously, than what we have. But as far as the amperage or voltage or whatever that
I'm
you're
just
referring to, I
comparing,
don't
you know,
have no
our-
idea.
Now, I thought I saw somewhere where it was sent to,
I was
Some
just gonna say,
local
if
vendor.
there was a local.
Yeah, the
but
Win
yeah,
Nelson,
none of them put in a bid.
well, Win Nelson is the one that's just like, whatever, $75 more or whatever.
But I don't know where
Right.
they,
They're
they're
local.
They're in Cape.
Cape, aren't they?
They're Cape, I mean, but it's in our area.
Do we just do local preference for sites?
Local
then?
preferences
School
in the
district.
school
School
district.
district, okay.
Yeah.
So we cannot do that?
We can't.
We could do anything we want.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
If we wanted
But
to,
local preference
Well-
being in district is specific.
yeah,
Yes.
he would recommend it if it would have met that, what is it, 10%, Lori?
Well, it depends on the dollar amount. On this, it probably would have been.
It goes up, or there's a variance as far as the,
There's none on here, there would only be.
Well, I mean, if Mike's recommending it, I mean, I certainly trust
Valid
his
question.
judgment.
I wish I had more information I could share with Rebecca as far as some of those specs. I do not know that. Mike presented this to us and said that he recommended that, so
Okay.
that's what I have to go with.
I move that we, oh, no, you already have
We have a motion. Any other? Seeing none, all in favor?
them.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Next item is a consideration of the window door replacement bids, and I think Lori had covered that very well in her budget overview about some of those things that would be left off. These are the essential items that Mike feels like that we need right now. And with that would be some renovation to the high school, being that of the girls' gym, the C building. We need to replace some windows there, and we also need to replace the doors. Some of those windows in the girls' gym, I believe, were there when the school was built back in the 60s. So it's time. Well, Lori and I talked. I don't know if they're the high ones or low ones. They're the in-between ones, I think, is what we have. That were but
The one squirrel we did it.
yeah.
But I still don't know if the squirrels are climbing my line. One level has to be replaced, the other level we can push off a couple years if we have to.
You could see that Mike had sent out bids, solicited bids from several vendors. Maverick and Crown were the only two that came out and measured the windows, and Maverick was the only one that submitted a bid. The total for that, for the doors and the windows in C building and also, well, A building and also girls' gym is $56,427.
Why did he scratch off in the,
Because those were additional items that we didn't need at this time. Talking about, he scratched off some of the windows in the weight room, or in the girls' gym, and then also some of the other windows in the girls' gym. I believe that those were, do you have any idea on that? Because I don't know that.
The only thing I know from Mike is that he wanted an estimate on all of the windows that were potentially to be
Based upon the
replaced.
budget, if it was,
Yes.
if it held
And
up,
then-
we could go ahead and get
Then
those
he,
figured.
the only thing we're presenting today is what he feels has to be presented. And then he had a good cost base for, if the money's good and we can spend more, then he had an estimate on that. While they were there measuring, I think he just had to measure all.
oh, okay.
The windows in all of those buildings are in really sad shape. Girls' gym, band shell,
Why don't we replace them? Why don't we go ahead and replace them?
because of the overall cost. We're gonna replace part of those, and we'll start with that, and if the budget holds up, and we have things play out well with the budget, then we can go out later.
Another thing is that timing wise, they knew what they could get done this summer so that we could start school. So some of it he wouldn't be able to start until school was out. It might still wind up being in this fiscal year, but he wouldn't start the work till the end of May. So he might come back to the board to buy the windows in March or April and get them lined up. But he knew the number he could put in that was reasonable to get school started.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve? Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Last item under requiring action, consideration of A+ candidate, and you realize that we did this last 2 weeks ago in an early June meeting, but we failed to list one of our applicants, one of our candidates. So it's my recommendation to approve that one candidate at this time.
So moved.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries.
We have, under informational, the PN graduation is coming up on Thursday at 7 o'clock. If anyone's interested in attending, you're more than welcome to attend. I think we have several administrators that are going to be there. I believe Ms. Black has said that she's going to be there. Anyone else wants to be there, please come support. It's a really nice event. I think you really appreciate it.
I'll try to be there.
Great. Under information also, school building landscaping, which was something that was brought up last time. So the board may want to discuss this, or they may want to leave this. I just put it on there as far as where you want to go with it.
Yeah, Heather, you
Heather had
sent
talked
a
about it.
text around on that. Do you want to?
I just
Mention
would
that.
follow up on what we discussed. Amy had the idea of putting some landscaping down, and I mean, I'm all for it. I think that it would be a good thing to do.
Not just landscaping, but like, if we need to do some painting or some external enhancements. Which may be mostly landscaping, but like maybe painting the fences and things like that, so.
I tend to agree too. I think
Would you
that's-
like me, or I should say in conjunction with Mike, in collaboration with Mike, to get a list together and present that back to the board? It's something though that you would like to get done though, I think prior to the start of school.
That's why I sent the
Yeah.
email saying if we were gonna do it, let's get on it and get
Yeah.
something moving with it, but
I tend to agree. I mean, a lot of those are the face of the school that could be easily change the look of what you can see when it's proposal.
I don't think Mike, I think we talked about this, Mike doesn't have time to do it, does he?
He does not have time to do it, no. It would be something, but then again, how's it gonna be paid for?
Yeah.
You know, how are we gonna go about this? Are we gonna be out there doing this? Or,
Depending on what we do landscaping wise, we might get some offsets from the Department of Conservation. Fellow that works in my office is a private lands biologist for Scott County, and he's agreed to meet, although it's not gonna be something that's gonna be done and showy by the time school starts. But he's agreeable to evaluate some of the things that we have. You know, his idea is to work it into some sort of educational idea. You know, big thing right now is pollinators for monarch butterflies and the decreased habitat that they have right now. So, you know, he's looking at landscaping with wildflowers, possibly some native grasses, but depending on what's chosen, they might be able to help. And I don't know on what type of scale, I don't know what kind of budget he's got, but.
you start looking at landscaping, and I think we discussed this early in the summer, that probably would want to hold off on any major landscaping until maybe the fall, just because of the temp and everything else going on. It's not very wise to go ahead and plan it in.
Generating a list and dollar amounts, so that we kind of know what we're looking at. I mean,
And since all the positive things are gonna happen with the budget this year, we'll be.
Yeah, you got me on tape saying all that's gonna happen.
Well, you know, I don't know if you were volunteering as a committee, but I mean, the possibility of getting a couple of board members serve with some of the staff on a committee.
I think that'd be great.
that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Get some people and get some input and go around and look and see what's needed and
I think that'd be
come
real
back and
helpful.
say, this is what we think, and this is, get some quotes of how much it's gonna cost, and go from there.
Okay.
Do you have time to do that? You wanna do it?
she's on.
I mean, I will, I don't wanna do it just on myself.
No,
It needs to be
it's
other
part
people,
of-
but, I mean, I
part of
will,
us.
yes,
I
I
think it'd
will.
be a good idea. I mean, it's a good idea for board members to be, you know, looking at the buildings closely and that sort of thing, so it's helpful. You and somebody else would like to.
I'm no good with that. Just go look at my house, go in front of my house. You'll know.
Now, I'll work with you. I think that'd be, I think it's very,
I mean, I thought we could look at ask the principals,
Mhm.
if some of them had an
I
idea
think
of
it'd
what
be great.
they would like to see.
Good
and,
idea.
You know, go from there.
Could be as simple as getting it weeded.
but you said that at one
Planting a
time
few
you had some
bushes.
volunteers and stuff that did some work some years back.
Yes,
So-
yeah, absolutely.
Figure out what we want to do.
Absolutely.
Address that before.
Choose to work with Brad on some things too, I'll give you his contact.
Okay.
I can also work with him on this.
Well, that would be good. Maybe you should be also on this since you've got that contact. You're gonna be better.
Well, I was gonna give you his card. I'll do it, I'll be on it. I'll be on it.
Okay?
I was kind of thinking you should do it as well because you have that connection.
Well, I thought.
I'll make a motion.
I thought Heather referred to.
I did, I did. And I
Be
still
on
believe
that
that.
committee.
She's not wrong about that either.
I just don't know that I have the time for the next few weeks to do it, or else it would help.
We'll get out of that. So.
Well, I'll turn it over to you for consent agenda items.
Oh, yes. So on the consent agenda, there's just one item, and that's the acceptance of the 2015-16 Transportation Ridership Report.
I move that we accept it.
Second?
Motion and second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. And we have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, discussion, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
I don't think we have anything in the.
I have not turned it off.
Great.